Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming tonight. My name is Valdi Wiederpass. I'm a volunteer who serves as chair of the Susquehanna group of Sierra Club. Welcome to tonight's general membership meeting of our group, which will feature a talk on creating a bird-friendly backyard. These meetings are free and open to the public. You don't have to be a member of Sierra Club to attend, but we encourage membership as it helps us by providing funding for our activities and letting us know your contact information so we can update you on important matters. Foremost, we still have a need for a secretary to take notes at our executive committee meetings, which are held via Zoom, typically on the first Tuesday of every month. And then you would, the person that would volunteer would type and email the meeting minutes to our executive committee members. That's not really a difficult thing to do. We've been asking for over a year now. Person that used to do this, their spouse passed away, and for that reason they stopped doing this. So we would appreciate if somebody would step forward and volunteer. You don't have to be a member of the executive committee, but we would be very grateful if somebody would be willing to volunteer and become our secretary. September edition of the Susquehanna Sierra newsletter was posted months ago to our website. It's got interesting essays in there. There's a calendar available of upcoming events on our website, as well as having recordings of our past meetings on the website. The upcoming newsletter is going to be out in by the end of December, and that will have ballots so that you can vote for candidates for our executive committee. So we would appreciate it if you look for that in the mail and then send in your vote for who you would like to see on the executive committee. At least somebody please vote. I don't know what happens if nobody votes.
We're automatically in.
Is that, I hope so. Otherwise we stop having meetings.
4 candidates, actually 5 positions, 4 candidates.
So anyway, the legislative session ended in June, and the only major climate-related legislation that was passed was the Climate Change Superfund Act. So we would like people to contact Governor Kathy Hochul's office to urge her to sign the Climate Change Superfund Act into law, as well as the ban on CO2 fracking. That also needs to be signed by her to be put into law. Recent activity on that was she actually did ask for the bill, and we're hearing word that she is interested in signing it. So we're looking forward to that in the next few days, but it's not a guarantee because we're getting close to the end of the year here. And just as a reminder, New York State is 3 years behind on meeting the 2030 climate goals. And there's an essay about that in the September newsletter. Also, if you are going to call the governor, you might want to tell them, if you agree, to stop looking at nuclear power. That's too toxic, too expensive, too slow, too risky. And it's already occupying a lot of my time, as well as many other volunteers' time, to try to head this off before we waste a lot of government money on nuclear power. Let's see, what else? And just ask them to speed up. Renewable energy is the way to go. It's the cheapest that there is, including battery-based storage. And that's what's recommended by the Climate Action Council, as well as by scientists around the world. Coming events. The next month, on the 21st of January, we're going to have Tom Powell, a Binghamton University biology professor. Will be giving a talk on the effect of climate change on insects. And then in February, on the 18th, we're trying to get a professor to talk about wetlands. Maura Ashley is nice enough to be pursuing that. She's here tonight.
The wetland law is supposed to be going into effect in 2025.
Yes, so there's a new wetland law that was supposed to be going into effect the beginning of 2025 from New York State. So we're looking forward to a talk on wetlands. So tonight's presentation will teach people how to make the place you call home into a welcoming place for both birds and people. For many people, backyard birding is an excellent introduction to learning about our local birds. Beyond feeders, there are many things we can do to enhance the habitat of where we live to be friendlier and safer for birds. This presentation includes everything from tips for putting up bird feeders to creating a bird-friendly habitat with native plants. It will also cover actionable tips on how to minimize
The
predator
mic
birds,
pick you up?
such as
If not,
them hitting windows by accident
I
or
have someone in the
being
audience.
preyed
that check
upon
you
by
to see what the
cats.
volume is.
So, biography of Michelle Knuepfer, who was nice enough to be here tonight to give us a presentation. In her words, she is a lifelong nature enthusiast and naturalist who leads educational programming at the Waterman Conservation Education Center. Observing and teaching about birds is Michelle's passion. Michelle enjoys educating others about nature to spark a love for the natural world in people of all ages. Michelle graduated from St. Lawrence University with a degree in conservation biology, and since then have had the opportunity to work in the wildlife conservation and education field, both in New York State and other parts of the country. So thank you, Michelle, and I give the stage over to you.
A guide to creating a bird-friendly backyard. So my name is Michelle Knuepfer. I work as a naturalist and program specialist at Waterman Conservation Education Center. So at least a show of hands in the room, who here has at least heard of Waterman?
Heard of
Who
Waterman?
here has been?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Come on. All right, so starting out, basic ways, so it's kind of the general overview of how to attract birds to your backyard. So number one way that most people think of is usually bird feeders. So the picture here I have is my own backyard. This is actually a little bit older setup. I actually have two feeder poles now that have about 4 feeders total. But we have here a couple different kinds of feeders. This has the suet, a tube of just a regular seed mix, and then a little bit of a thistle seed mix in the background there. So bird feeders being what most people think of. Native plants. Native plants are your bird feeder that you don't have to refill. Really handy. So not only provides food, but provides cover for predators, flowers, attractive pollinators, both avian and insect. And these insects as well, insect-eating birds can also eat them. Really good as well to add is a water feature. So I don't personally have a water feature in here because I live very close to the river. The other way of kind of how to attract birds is to make your backyard safe for them as well. So a couple different ways on that. We still
Get double feedback for some reason.
looks like camera's adjusting good. All right, so keep cats indoors is one of the number one things. And there's a couple options that I have on that, as well as, you know, if you still have cats and want them to be able to explore a little bit. But as well as adding window treatments to minimize risk of window strikes. That's a big issue with birds. And decrease or eliminate any use of pesticides.
No, it's feedback for some reason.
So we have a nice little illustration here of some of the different types of bird feed. Okay.
My bad. I'm trying to mute mine. People are still getting
Doubles, okay.
double talk.
So we have suet, which is going to be popular with your woodpeckers. So on the bottom here, we have a downy woodpecker. I believe that's a downy from the big length. Downy woodpecker, a blue jay. Blue jays tend to absolutely love peanuts. Above that, we have a rose-breasted grosbeak. They are big fans of your black oil sunflower. They also love safflower. Nuthatch above that on the right. They love the suet. They love sunflower. We have Going up, we've got our cardinals.
Trying to get you to be the focus because it seems like it's picking up from my computer,
Huh.
but you don't have the same light that I do.
And then on top, we have our little titmouse, which loves kind of any type of seed, our little chickadees. Bluebirds will come to feeders occasionally, mostly just for mealworms. They are predominantly insect eaters, and not all of them are gone for the year. We have going back down over to our orioles, which love oranges. They also love things like jelly. We have our goldfinches, which goldfinches are strictly seed eaters. They will not even eat any bugs, not even when they're raising young. They're very strict on that. But really the best thing you can do is have a variety of stuff. So a lot of seed mixes, unfortunately, are filled with a lot of fillers. So things like millet or corn that the birds don't tend to like very much. So what they'll go and do is they'll shake back and forth with their beak and make a mess on the ground, which can attract other things, can lead to buildup that leads to like bacteria or mold issues. So I personally prefer to try to do like the seed mixes that are like mostly sunflower and stuff like that. But some of them will also have berries and like nuts and things that provides extra little variety. And cedar waxwings are one that will go for berries. I don't personally see them go to feeders very often. They'll mostly go for more wild food, but they're a nice charismatic bird in the winter. And in the summertime, you can also have nectar feeding. So you can find in stores pre-made nectar mixes. I find they're usually overpriced because it's just sugar and water that you can make on the stovetop. So the best part is 1 part sugar to 4 parts water. And you want to change that frequently, especially when it's hot out. That can get a buildup of mold over time otherwise. And that is not good for the birds. So a little example of a variety of feeders here. Little trick question, does anybody know where this is?
Cornell?
Yep.
No, it says it, but
Yeah.
anyway, I didn't see it.
So this is the main feeder setup at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology that they live stream all the time. So that's there at their building at Sapsucker Woods. So always fun to see, pull a video of that up, pull up their live stream and see how the weather in Ithaca is a little bit different than here sometimes. But they've got a nice variety. So they've got a platform feeder. So you can have a variety of different birds out at once. So we've got a blue jay, a cardinal, and I believe a female red-winged blackbird there. So they've got some peanuts, some other stuff in the background. And on this middle piece is actually, that's a suet feeder. So, right. Lots of different options. So again, there's tube feeders. There are feeders that you can get with baffles. So baffle is kind of anything that's going to try to prevent squirrels. Mm-hmm. So the age-old question is, to squirrel or not to squirrel? Do we want to completely deter squirrels, or do we want to let them hang around in the area but try to keep them out of their feeders? Personally, I'm more on the latter. So squirrels, there's actually been studies done that they act as sentinels against predators, and they can be one of the first alarm systems for something like a hawk or even like a cat. So the squirrels are actually good to have around if you can keep them out of the main feeders. But of course, the saying squirrel proof is not foolproof. So we got an example here on this corner with our little lovely rosy pink finches. So that is a style of feeder where if something that is too heavy sits on it, those metal pieces will pull down and close the ports of the feeder. So that's one style of that. Sometimes those work. Sometimes the squirrels figured out how to get on top of them. Squirrels are very, very smart and very, very persistent. But as well, we've got some other kinds of feeders here. So we have our thistle feeder. So thistle seeds that little finches tend to go for are very, very small. And so you can't really put them in a regular kind of feeder. It's all just going to fall out. So there's tight mesh things like this is one option. Some places you can also get like a sock that, but the finches have very tiny little dexterous beaks that can pick out those little seeds and shell them. So if anybody is not familiar with suet, suet is rendered beef fat. So if you ever wanted to make your own, that is something that you could get like from a local butcher sometimes. And so usually what you add to that are things like seeds, nuts, people will add cornmeal. I've heard of people adding oats, sometimes dried insects like dried mealworms or crickets, little fruits. For birds, fat is fuel. So this is absolutely awesome to have around in winter, especially for your woodpeckers, love it. We have our lovely little downy again, sitting on our suet feeder, and an example of how to make some yourself. So good for woodpeckers. I will warn that if you have a lot of starlings in the area, starlings will go for suet. So prepare that there is the possibility to be swarmed. But I have seen, I've seen nuthatches go for suet, and occasionally chickadees. I don't know if the chickadees are actually going for the suet or the seeds mixed in, but. So, and a good guide to set up here. So for setting up your bird feeder, placement is everything. So again, take that kind of with a grain of salt on my diagram here of squirrel-proof zone. Ideally, it's thought that they can't jump more than about 10 feet in one go. You know, you might have some sort of Olympic level squirrel that might be able to do more than that or figure out a way around that. Again, they are very persistent. So, but the big thing you do want to worry about is proximity to windows. So ideally more than 10 feet from a window. If you want to put one closer, you want to put it less than 3 feet. So if it's less than 3 feet away from the window, the birds can't pick up enough speed to crash hard into that window. And placing it near cover as well is good, so that birds can, you know, have something they can dart back and forth to safety, just for their overall stress levels. And also if a predator does come through, you know, because birds do congregate at feeders, you do have a high tendency to get things like hawks come swoop in dramatically, and you might get quite a show. But I will talk about it later. But if you do have a feeder that you want to place near a window, highly recommend using some sort of markers or decals on the window to make the bird, that window more easily seen by the bird so they don't try to run into it. And this is another big one that I admit I am not always the greatest on this, but bird feeder maintenance. So the big thing is cleaning your feeders. So the recommendation is to try to aim for that about once every 2 weeks. And you want to give them a good scrub, a good soak in either really, really, really hot soapy water or a diluted bleach solution. You can also use an alternative of 1 part vinegar to 2 parts water. And once that's all soaked and rinsed out, You want to let them fully dry out before you put any feed back in them. And that's just to prevent things like mold and bacteria building up, as well as in the case of certain species, certain diseases that can be transmitted amongst birds, especially. And another part of that is raking the area below, so where you get seed buildup. Over time on a well-established feeder, you may see like some die off of the grass in spots. So that's where it's best to try to like just periodically go out and rake it around. Or if you have the squirrels keeping, you know, your birds company, they may help you rake with digging. And on the suet as well, just notes about warm weather. For nectar feeders, try to clean them every time they're refilled. It's sugar water. Things are going to grow in that. And I personally do not put suet out in the summertime, just because it can start to get really, really soft and potentially get onto birds' feathers, or it can just go rancid. So. And going on, we have our major threats to birds. Not fun stuff bit on our slide here, but there are things that we can do to help our birds and help combat each of these issues. So, going on. Little graph here, and this is from the organization Partners in Flight, that has a really nice graph. This is based on a 2014 study data that was looking at particularly predominantly human causes of bird decline. So, and both in the US and Canada. So you can see that the number one is actually cats. And that can be both cats that are pet cats, that are outdoor cats. Ooh. Okay. So outdoor pet cats, it can also be, you know, like feral cats, or, you know, kind of community cats that are not owned by anybody. In most cases, they're kind of grouped together on that because there's not an easy way to differentiate that in data. And these are all estimates as well. So it could be lower, it could be a little bit higher. But cats, building window collisions, cars unfortunately are a big one. Collision with power lines, communication towers, electrocution from power lines. Some of that is a little bit less than it used to be on certain parts because we have changed the distance between the power lines in some cases. That was affecting raptors a lot, where the height indifference of the power lines was such that a hawk could perch on one, and if it was a big enough bird, could complete the circuit with the line above it. So that is something that there has been progress made on over the years, which is really good to see. But as well, we have agricultural chemicals. Wind turbines is a concern. It's not quite as big of an issue, you know, at least from what this data set found. Typically, the areas where wind turbines are worse is for raptors. So it's kind of an unfortunate case where the areas geographically where you get a lot of wind for wind power are also the good wind routes for raptor migration. So there are a lot of groups that are looking at how to mitigate that. Sometimes that can include even just changing the color of one blade of the windmill so that the birds are able to see it. And that has been shown to help.
Michelle, what I noticed is the vertical axis there is actually exponential.
Yes.
So in other words, cats are 10 times as bad as windows.
Yeah. But the good news is that is something we can do something about it. So
Michelle, can I ask a question too?
yeah.
I'm noticing Canada, there's a substantial drop in Canada. Why would that be? Are there fewer wind turbines up there? Would that-
My best guess on that, I don't know a ton about this data set that the graph came from, but my guess is because there's overall lower population density in Canada, there's, because this is primarily looking at human caused mortality, with fewer people, you're going to have less human caused mortality.
It just in comparison to
Yeah.
everything else,
Yeah.
it seems to be a substantial drop.
Yeah.
Less infrastructure in Canada.
Mhm.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, I think that's the main way.
Yeah.
I mean, the agriculture and the graphs are kind of similar. There's still a huge amount of agriculture in Canada.
Right.
Which makes me think that that kind of makes sense. And then power lines, there's probably not a lot of difference because people are more spread out in Canada. So it's hard to say, but it's a lot of the infrastructure
Yeah.
difference.
Well, and Canada may also have the case of where a lot of birds are coming up to breed further north in the boreal forest and Arctic is where the population levels tend to be denser in terms of people. So I don't know how much that factors in as well. So our first, one of my favorite phrases on this is "stop the thuds." And that comes from some stuff here. So essentially what happens with windows is birds don't understand that if they can see through something, they can't fly through it. And so there's kind of two different ways that windows become an obstacle on that. One is they think they can fly through it. The other is they see a reflection and they think that something in that reflection is somewhere they can land. So for example, if you have a window on one side and say there's a bush or tree right here and there's a reflection of that bush or tree in the window, the bird sees the bush and sees the reflection of the bush and thinks it can land there. So, and unfortunately, sometimes that can be an event that the birds survive. Frequently, they will, seem stunned at first and seem to fly away okay, but actually essentially get like a concussion from it or other neurological damage that they do not make it out of later. It can also make them more vulnerable to predators. So, but the good news is there's a lot we can do about it. So a couple different examples here. We have the dots here on the corner are something called Feather Friendly. Is one of the companies that does a product on that. So what that is essentially kind of a film that goes over the windows that provides a dot grid. So those dots, the birds can see it. The birds don't think that they can fly through it. And the other example here next to that is something called Acopian bird savers, which are essentially kind of a cord curtain. So those can actually be made fairly easily DIY. And what it is essentially cords of, if anybody's familiar with paracord, you just cut strips of paracord the length of the window or close to it and hang them about 4 inches apart, going vertically up and down your window. And the birds see that and they don't try to fly into it. So that's an easy one that we can do on that. And I believe Binghamton University has recently put in some of these dot grids on several of the buildings on campus. So very, very good to see there.
Does Waterman sell that product?
We have some of the decals. So the decals are good. So a lot of the decals or other things, there are pre-treated windows that actually have designs that are in the ultraviolet spectrum on the pigments. So birds can see in the ultraviolet spectrum, people can't. So to us, we see a clear, nice, normal window. To the birds, they see obstacle, they can't fly through that. So that's one way of, it is a bit more expensive, but a way of establishing in buildings a good bird safe window. But the time that this is most critical especially is during migration season. And one of the things you can do as well is even just turning off outside lights and closing your curtains. So the birds will often be attracted to the lights of buildings. This is particularly bad in large cities, but anywhere where there's buildings, where there's lights at night, a lot of birds in migration will navigate via the position of the moon or stars. And so they see other lights and they get confused and they try to fly towards it. And that's when that happens. So next one here, we have our cats. Anybody here have cats? All right, of everybody who has cats here, who keeps them inside? We're good. Well, we'll get on you guys. We'll get on the other ones that didn't raise your hands there. So there's a couple different options. So the big thing with cats is outdoor cats are known to kill between 1.3 and 4 billion birds each year. The estimate is fairly wide there because it's a little bit hard to study. Because obviously a feral cat isn't easily going to bring their catch back to a door so that you can count it. But the trouble with cats is even well-fed cats will hunt and kill birds. So unfortunately, in that case where people think that feeding feral or outdoor cats will help that, it actually doesn't. So unfortunately, there's not a foolproof solution on that, but there are ways that we can at least help keep owned cats inside. The other one as well is just if you have a cat, make sure that it is spayed or neutered. And anybody that you know who has a dog or a cat, encourage them to do that as well. But the ideal is keep them inside. Safest for the birds, safest for the cat. A lot of cats that are outdoors have shorter lifespans due to various different things, either from predators, cars, all sorts of different things. But there are some creative solutions that we've come up with that can help cats still enjoy the outside and, be safer for birds. So we have on the top here something called a catio. So cat patio kind of idea. And that can connect into a window or door on one side, and then is essentially kind of an enclosed open air porch. The cats can come out, sit, lounge around, get some good sniffs of outside air, but still be safely contained. Another option is, if you are able to, hugely depends on the personality of the cat, but if you're able to leash train, that's really handy. Some cats will do this. Some cats want absolutely nothing to do with a harness. So that's very variable. But another option as well, if you have a cat that will not leash train and you want to at least mitigate how much it may be getting hunting birds outside, is something called a Birds Be Safe collar. So in the corner here we have my cat Siri, who is not around anymore but is still kind of immortalized, showing off her as we call it, her clown collar. So how this works is it is a tube of fabric that fits around a regular collar, and it has a reflective edge on the very outside that kind of is stiff and keeps it out. But the basic idea is the birds can see them coming. The cats may think they look a little bit ridiculous. They kind of do. I think they're adorable. But they are trainable on that. I know with Siri, ours, she would always go to the back door and wait because she knew that to be able to go outside, she had to have her collar on. So she would wait and sit there and stick out her neck, waiting like, okay. So the Birds Be Safe collar, I always do mention I have a little bit of bias on this one because this has been studied. 2015 study was one of the first by Susan Wilson, who was my advisor at St. Lawrence University. And she has gone on to do some other studies as well, looking at both up in northern New York State as well as in other regions. But they found that the cats that were wearing the collars killed 19 times fewer birds than uncollared cats. And they did compare that, with the same cat when it was or was not wearing the collar. So they do work. Obviously ideal, keep them inside, but there are other options too.
Now, you could put a weight on that collar and slow those cats down a little bit too, right?
Probably not. Yeah, I don't know that would go very well with the cat. And usually you can combine that with like a little bell as well. The only thing about the Birds Be Safe collars is that they don't work against rodents. So for whatever reason, the cats could still sneak up on rodents just fine, but the birds could see them more easily. So the next one, habitat loss. How do we combat habitat loss? Couple different methods. So the one, support organizations that are preserving habitat for birds. So our Sierra Club here, Nature Conservancy are some, New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, local land trusts, National Wildlife Federation is one, Audubon, Cornell Lab of Ornithology, and obviously I have to mention Waterman Conservation Center that we have. I always forget the number, but we have about 6 different preserves. 6 or 7?
I think it's 7.
It is 7, yeah. Yeah, so we have our Hilton Road, Brick Pond, IBM Glen, Pettis Hill, Appalachian Marsh, and Hiawatha Island. But so support organizations that are, preserving bird habitat, but also you can make your own habitat. You can add more habitat in your yard by planting native. So the big basis with these native plants is native plants bring native insects, which bring food and habitat for birds. And sometimes that is, habitat or food for birds directly in form of like pollinators, seeds, fruits, or indirectly in terms of attracting the insects. So a couple different options, so different kinds of plants you can do. So what types of plants to include? So they can be for habitat or food. So you want a good variety is ideal. So you can have larger things like shrubs, things like dogwoods, your perennials are really good. Seed and fruit producing trees. So things like high bush blueberry, silky dogwood, your northern red oak, serviceberry, which is also known by many, many other names other than just serviceberry. But we've got some different examples of those, as well as some flowering plants, such as our gorgeous pink bee balm here. Sumac is a really good one as well. So wildflowers, so you can attract your pollinators. So things like bee balm, Joe Pyeweed is another one that's tall, adds some nice height. Cardinal flower as well. So really, you want to make a room for the whole food chain. So your native plants bring your native insects, attracting the native birds. And some more options. So variety is the key. So encourage your biodiversity in any way possible. So we've got a little goldfinch on some echinacea or purple coneflower here. A fun fact on goldfinches is they actually nest significantly later in the season than most other birds because they are timing their nesting and the hatching of their eggs to when thistle seeds are available. So, and they will also use milkweed fluff to line their nests. So variety is good. Think of a forest. You've got your canopy of trees, your intermediate story, smaller trees and bushes, down to your shrubs, grasses, forbs, your ground cover, moss, things like that, and leaf litter. Everywhere is somewhere for bugs to live, and we want to encourage the bugs. And that's the biggest part of this, is kind of a bit of a paradigm shift, in that we don't want to discourage the bugs, we want to encourage them. Bugs are good. We like them. Well, native bugs. But native plants have also been shown to attract a much higher number of insects than non-native plants. So like even ornamentals or other invasive plants that may be fruit bearing, so things like autumn olive. Some birds will eat that, but something like your dogwoods and your serviceberry, your sumac will attract even more. And the other one that's also good about native plants is, I know some people worry about birds becoming over reliant on bird feeders. So for the most part, to assuage people's worries, it's not a major concern. So generally, what birds are eating at feeders is a very small proportion of their overall diet. So we're seeing a little window into their lives. Most of the rest of that time, they're eating wild foods. But our next one here is avoiding pesticide use. So anybody familiar with bioaccumulation and biomagnification? Yes, so bioaccumulation being the increase in concentration of a chemical over time in an individual organism. Biomagnification is that increase as you go up the food chain. So some well-known examples of that are things like mercury in fish. So why they say to avoid eating too much of things like swordfish that are predatory fish. But the big famous one with birds is DDT. So with DDT, for anybody not familiar, it was sprayed on the insects. Little critters ate the insects. Other birds that went up the food chain, and by the time you got to your raptors, your things like eagles, your falcons, they had such high concentrations of the DDT in their system that it was really having a major impact on them. So for the case of a lot of raptors, what happened was it was breaking down the calcium. So calcium was not being properly deposited in the eggshells. And so just the minimal weight of the bird adult sitting in a nest was crushing the eggs. It was also could make them non-viable as well. But outlawing DDT and a lot of conservation work, and most people now can say that they have seen an eagle in the area, which I think is pretty darn cool. So a little example here, a graphic we have about specifically neonic or neonicotinoid pesticides. So that is a broad group of pesticides that are particularly nasty. And as you can see, they can get into our environment in a lot of different ways. And they can kill off the food supplies, they can hurt the birds individually. So even just a single seed that is coated in that pesticide can hurt or kill an individual bird. So we really want to not use, most neonic pesticides are typically used in more, industrial agricultural settings rather than, somebody doing a backyard, a little bit of spraying to get rid of your dandelions. But so something we want to advocate for moving away from using. So some alternatives we have. One of my personal favorites is ecological solutions, which includes kind of companion planting. So things like marigolds or fennel. Mint is an option. I don't necessarily suggest mint as much because mint has a tendency to overgrow very easily. So you may start out with one little bit of mint. It will not stay that way for long. But one of the biggest things you can do is install nest boxes for birds. So especially in agricultural settings, in barns and such, putting up owl nest boxes. Barn owls, and as an example, are able to consume thousands of rodents annually. And that cuts down on, have your owls take up residence. You don't need to use rodenticides. They are the rodenticides and they're better at it. So some other natural insect repellents, you can use neem oil. The one thing I always say, a caveat of neem oil, is that can hurt some of your good insects as well as your bad ones. But that can be useful for things like powdery mildew as an option. One that's pretty good as terms of an option is diatomaceous earth. Anybody heard of that one? So diatomaceous earth, useful for, using in gardens as well as around your home. If you have issues with insects coming in, or sometimes issues with like fleas and cats, you can use that in place of, like flea collars or things like that. And what it actually is made of, I wanted to include a little microscopic view of what diatomaceous earth looks like. So it's made of diatoms, which are very, very hard, very scratchy little microorganisms from the ocean, dried down. And essentially what it does is kind of shreds anything it comes in contact with. So it's going to be hard to grow around something when you are walking on a bed of razor blades, is kind of how to think about that. But in terms of something like, you want to spot target some weeds, you can use boiling water. Just straight boiling water will kill off a plant that's, say in a crack in a sidewalk. So another DIY options include things like mixing vinegar and dish soap and a little bit of salt. So I personally have used these to get rid of Japanese beetles. So as long as you have a little bit of dish soap in there, that cuts the surface tension of the water. So once the bugs get in there, they will drown, they can't get back out. But the last one I always want to mention is, in terms of targeting industrial pesticide use, is buy and support organic farming and like local farmers wherever possible. So a couple different options here of just some links and native plants of where to get them. So Grow Wild Native up in Brooktondale, Plantsman in Groton is a really good one. Cutler Botanic Gardens, more so for information on how to do gardening. They have their Master Gardener program. And every year, soil and water conservation districts will put out a order form that you can order perennials and trees and shrubs and such. Usually they post those in like January or February, and the orders come in April. And so both Tioga and Broome do those. They do tend to be in large quantities on that, I'll say. So if that is a route you want to go, always good option to kind of team up with some neighbors and order some native plants together. So last one I always say for making your yard bird friendly is nest boxes, your bird houses. You're providing them food, you're providing them shelter, give them somewhere to live and raise their babies too. So the big part on this is there's many, many different kinds and shapes and placements of nest boxes. And so you want to research what specific species you're trying to attract. So you want to pay attention to where you're placing it, the height of it, what habitat type it's in, where it is compared to some cover. So it's usually recommended to not add perches. So like right on the hole here, because that makes it easier for predators to get into the box. But you want a nice slanted roof like this. You want holes, you want ventilation. A lot of them are also made with like some ventilation holes on the bottom. So you have like drainage. But the birds will make their own perches just fine. But the big thing as well is cleaning out your boxes in between seasons. And that just prevents buildup of any diseases or nest parasites or things like that. Depending on the species, some birds will reuse the same area without doing much to it. Some of them will rebuild the nest stacked on top of it. I've seen bluebird boxes that had multiple rounds of nests stacked several inches deep. Whereas other birds like house wrens, part of their courtship ritual actually involves cleaning out the old material. So.
It's good to look for a nest box that has a double thickness around the hole as well, so that prevents predators from reaching in, and they can't get their paw down into the nest box to grab the eggs or the little birds. That's a helpful thing to look for too.
Yeah. And I also wanted to include, so the only trouble with putting nest boxes up is you may encounter starlings. So this is a really handy diagram that shows the diameter of the nest hole that you want for different species. So several of the species here are Western species that sorry, we don't really have mountain bluebirds around here. It'd be really cool if we did, but so things like bluebirds will use like 1.5 inches one. So some of these you can get pre-made nest boxes, but the Nest Watch website that's run by Cornell Lab of Ornithology has a bunch of really, really detailed guides and plans for how to build your own nest box for each species. And they'll give you the dimensions, how thick to make it, how to design it, where to put it, what direction to have it facing, all the questions you could have in the guides. And then just last slide here, we have some links for further learning. So for options for preventing window strikes, American Bird Conservancy has a products and solutions database. So they have a whole big list of different options and how effective they have studied them to be. And that's everything from as I mentioned, like the dot films on the windows, to the decals, to even just putting like screens on your windows is also an option. I've heard of some people putting like chicken wire over the windows, or even just something like putting some tempera paint on the outside. The big thing is you want to put anything for deterring window strikes needs to be on the outside of the window, because the birds don't see through the window necessarily as well. But nest boxes from Nest Watch there, you can look it up by species. Any question you have, they probably have the answer for it. And as well, different native plants. Audubon, New York has a whole website where you can put in your location and your email, and they will send you a whole list of what plants they recommend that are bird friendly. And as well, Finger Lakes Native Plant Society is one. Yeah. So thank you, and hope you learned some interesting stuff.
Thank you very much. Well, do people have any other questions? Any comments or?
Can you tell us a little bit about the raptors at Waterman? You still have
We don't have the live raptors anymore.
Oh,
Yeah. So those were with a previous director who had the both permitting and knowledge of how to keep them. So we don't have that anymore.
so it's been a while.
Yeah. Yeah. But we do still have some live animals there. We have 2 turtles and a tortoise, all of whom are quite charismatic and fun to watch. So.
And Michelle, we had that, was it a raptor presentation?
Yes. So we do have a group that comes in. We're hoping to have them at least once, possibly more than once a year. So Cornell Raptor Program comes in and does presentations. So they bring in some raptors. Really neat program. It's predominantly led, and the programs are run by Cornell students. But the Cornell Raptor Program, the origin of it was actually in captive rearing for the conservation and reintroduction of a lot of different raptor species.
And very well attended.
Yes.
Michelle, do you know how much cooperative extension can help people with all this bird?
All sorts of different things. So I know they are a really good source for anything with your native plants and how to set up a garden with incorporating the native plants and stuff on that. So
One thing that I want to mention that I have read is that house sparrows, if you feed cheap seed, it attracts more house sparrows too. And house sparrows, once they are attracted to a nest, it is really difficult to get them to give up the nest. The male will usually pick out a nest first and then try to attract a female. And if it's a nest box that you're trying to use to attract some other birds, it is really difficult. I faced this battle a couple of maybe 2 or 3 years in a row. I mean, it is just, what I found is that if you put fishing line from the leading edge of the roof down near the bottom of the nest box, and it's close enough where the house sparrow lands, it tends to land with its wings forward. And once they hit that fishing line, if it's stretched tight, they will avoid that nest box. That seems to work.
Yeah.
The other thing is putting in multiple reflective prismatic plastic tape. It's not sticky tape, it's tape that's high to like you put in nails and you tie it around the nail. And if you put enough of those, that can help deter them too. The native birds will get used to it and they will still find the nest and will go in. And bluebird, the fishing line thing doesn't bother them because they land differently. And I've seen this work. So I just wanted to bring that up because I spent a lot of time reading about it and trying to figure out how to fight that battle. And it's not foolproof, but it helps if you do both of those things. The reflective strips, if you put enough of them on there, especially if they're on like a fork thing up above the nest box, And then the fishing line stretched on both sides of the
Yeah.
nest box. And otherwise, the other thing you want to watch out for too, if you do have outdoor cats and you're trying to keep a nest box too, you want to put in like chicken wire down below so that the cat can't climb whatever
Yeah.
hole it is that you put the nest box on.
Yeah, so kind of funnel shaped baffles work as well on that.
Yeah.
If I go back,
One of those funnel shaped.
if I can. We have them on the duck boxes, yes.
Duck
Now,
Go back to, almost back. There we go. So showing an example of a baffle here.
Good.
So this sits, it's sort of a disc shaped, sort of upside down funnel shape. And what it's, so it looks like it's anchored on the pole. It actually sits on a little piece.
a clamp.
Yeah, so there's a clamp that it sits on, and then the baffle just sits loosely on top of it. I can say that there was an afternoon of quite some entertainment watching a squirrel try to jump from one pole and continuously hit the baffle on a rainy day because the pole was too slippery and it couldn't jump quite enough to get over top of where the baffle was.
At least 11 times. It would jump and then the baffle would just kind of spin and it would
Yeah.
go flying off.
And there are some squirrel deterrent feeders that if something that's too heavy comes on, will just start spinning. And those can be quite entertaining if you're not the squirrel.
Yeah.
Got some advice about bears.
Bears. Bears in general, the only advice I can give is to take your feeders down at night. So
down in the spring too.
yeah, DEC, their general recommendation is actually to not have feeders up during the summer. And especially if you're in an area with bears. Really, the big thing with having feeders up, the ideal time for it is winter. Winter is when the birds are more stressed for food availability, so that's when it's most beneficial to them. So, anybody, any questions from our Zoom crowd?
What do you clean the nest boxes with?
Um,
Vinegar and water, is that good? Yeah, I really don't want, so.
Typically, I've seen, because you can't really like take it out and soak it. Typically, I've seen the way they're constructed is so that there's a flap either on the side or on the bottom, kind of a hinge sort of setup, so that you can take all that old nest material out. I haven't necessarily heard of people like spraying them down. It's more just getting the debris out of there.
Michelle, I think Bob had his hand up. You did before. Yep.
Oh, yep.
Bob, you're muted.
Oh.
One other thing I wanted to mention too, while we're tweeting is you can buy screens to keep the bottom of the nest material that a bird will put into a nest box raised above the actual floor of the nest. And that helps prevent, I think, what they're called blowflies. Parasitic larvae of the flies from being able to climb up and get into the nesting material and then attack the baby birds once they hatch. That's worth buying. It's cheap. And I think they're sold at maybe Agway and certainly probably Birds Unlimited.
Yeah,
so that's worth considering too. And it's made out of like a flexible like 1/4 inch mesh, something like that. You can even buy the 1/4 inch mesh yourself and cut it and bend it,
Yeah.
you know, to fit whatever size
Mhm.
bird box you have, so do it yourself.
Is that-
No, we lost his picture and I messaged him, see if he had a question, but he hasn't answered.
But I think you said this presentation will be shared on the website as well.
Yes.
Yeah,
So.
thank you for sending
And
that.
that has all of the links and everything. So
Good.
Yes.
this is the time of year to start planning it. And if you know somebody who likes birds and wants to do more with this, maybe a good holiday present is to get us some native plants.
Lots of great
So-
ideas for holiday presents.
I bought
Yes.
myself a new suet feeder.
Hmm?
I bought myself a new suet feeder.
There you go.
That's the one that
Yes.
stick one for the woodpeckers.
Oh, I did want to mention, the other thing with squirrels is so you can buy special kinds of seed that have capsaicin or hot pepper juice laden in the seed. So those will deter squirrels to a point. So the thing of how that works is mammals we can taste that heat. So that hot pepper, usually they'll use like cayenne pepper juice. And I have seen squirrels get into that and then go rapidly. And it does deter them, at least for a little while. Sometimes they come back, sometimes they don't. But it does tend to be a lot more expensive to do those seed mixes. And as well as, because of what we've found on studies that the squirrels can be good sentinels, we don't necessarily want to completely deter them from feeding in the area. We just want to keep them out of where the birds are feeding. Because we would prefer to feed the birds. Yeah.
What about just sprinkling hot
Hmm?
pepper over the seeds?
I don't know. It depends on how you do it and probably depends on the concentration of like how much there is in the mix. So anything on that will deter rodents. So
Also pure suet as opposed to peanut suet. The squirrels don't like pure.
Squirrels prefer the pure suet,
No, they don't.
or they don't? prefer
They're going after the
Oh,
peanut
it's well,
taste.
that's the peanut.
yeah, a lot of animals really, really like peanuts.
Yes.
Blue jays will absolutely swarm peanut feeders. So
I had just one thing about putting nest boxes
yeah,
far apart.
yes.
Kind of one exception to that, because one of the most favorite birds for putting up nest boxes are bluebirds.
Hmm.
But they will be occupied by tree swallows, which will out
Yes.
bluebirds. So one trick is to put 2 nest boxes fairly close to each other.
Yeah.
And then the tree swallows will occupy one of them, and they'll drive away all tree swallows, but they won't drive away bluebirds.
Yes.
Yep, and I think Waterman does that.
Yeah, we have a couple different, several different nest boxes. If you visit the center, there's one next to the pavilion, there's one on either side of the pavilion. And that actually gets used periodically by, I think, the same bluebird family multiple times over the season. So typically what I've seen of several years in a row now is the bluebirds will start out with their first clutch of the year in one of the boxes. And then as it gets warmer and we tend to have a lot more events going on in the spring, and there's people in the pavilion, they will fledge out that clutch and then go to the other one that's further away from the pavilion area. But, and I actually saw last year we had the bluebirds fledged a clutch out. They were done. House wrens came into that same box. They took it over. They fledged a clutch out as the bluebirds were going on the other end of the field. So, and another round of house wrens and tree swallows were going down the hill. So if you put it up, they will find it. It may take a little bit sometimes, but if the habitat's there, they will come. All right. Well, thank you for coming, everybody, and thanks for folks on Zoom attending.